Okay, I think I am live. I believe I am at least. What's going on, people? What the heck is going on? So, for those who celebrate Christmas, it is the Christmas season. So, Merry Christmas to everybody and a Happy New Year to everybody else who might be watching. And also, if you celebrate some kind of winter holiday of some kind, it takes place during the month of December. Happy that to you. So today we're going to be discussing The Hobbit by. Oh gosh, I hate when the phone does this. When I'm live and it's still giving me notifications. I'm sure there's a way to turn it off, but I don't want to screw with that right now. We're going to be talking about The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Somebody, I was listening to a podcast about the Lord of the Rings the other day, and somebody jokingly said that his name is Jimmy Red Robin Tolkien, and I quite like that. I actually don't know what his name stands for, but we're gonna go with Jimmy Red Robin Tolkien. Um, I am a huge Tolkien fan, and I mean, well, I guess there are obviously people out there that are much bigger Tolkien fans than I, but I will say that in general, I think I am a bigger fan than some. I have a tattoo of the One Ring around my arm, and then I also have I have read at this point The Hobbit twice. This is my second time reading it. And I have seen the movies, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Peter Jackson trilogy, more times than I can count. I might have seen the trilogy like a dozen times, maybe. It's kind of baked into my philosophy. It's baked into my worldview. My dad was a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, and so he kind of imbued that in me. And especially as the movies were coming out and I was a kid, we went to the theaters to watch them and watched them a million times. So I'm a huge fan. I'll not say that I'm like the most knowledgeable person on Tolkien and Middle Earth, but there are people who make it their life's mission to study this type of stuff. So I don't want to imply that I'm an expert of these things by any means, but I am a big fan. I plan on reading The Lord of the Rings at some point, as well as the Silmarillion. I have a copy of the Silmarillion. I do need to get a copy of the actual Lord of the Rings. And I'm also interested in reading some of Tolkien's other stuff. I know I have a copy of Children of Hurin, which I read a little bit of. At the time, I could not get into it. It was very boring to me. I'll try at some point to get back into it. I know there's also Beren and Luthien, which is supposedly a very good read. A lot of people enjoy that, so I'll be giving that a read at some point. But today, we're talking specifically about the book that started it all. I have a lovely slipcase version of The Hobbit that was gifted to me by two very good friends of mine, Chris and Natalie. So this is the copy we're going to be discussing today. I'm not sure which edition this is, or what printing of this is. I think it might be like a 1997 printing. I don't really know, but it's super awesome. This was again a birthday present for me. Just a lovely volume of The Hobbit. You can see that there's like little leaves on the I was going to call it a spine, but it's kind of the opposite of the spine. But just the way this book is bound is really quite lovely. So let's get into it. I mean, what is there to say about The Hobbit, man? Like, again, this is the book that started it all. It kickstarted, such a huge world and universe that so many people are in love with, that this book really is kind of the thing that jump started it. I guess I'll go with like a brief synopsis, I guess, for anybody who's not aware of what The Hobbit is. Obviously, there are movies that have been made about The Hobbit that are sort of the prequel, I guess you could say, to Lord of the Rings. I have a lot of thoughts on this that I'm sure will come up at various points throughout the podcast. But I will say that, like, The Hobbit in general is a story about a an unlikely person going on an adventure and accomplishing what they didn't think they were capable of doing. That's like the roots of the story. You have this person named Bilbo Baggins, who is a hobbit, the titular hobbit, in fact. And hobbits are. We can dive into the lore at various points if we want to. I guess the hobbits are little folk that are rather simple. They're kind of like rural people that again are not very adventurous, right? Towards the beginning of the book, we get a lot of dialogue between Gandalf and Bilbo, talking about that Bilbo doesn't really want to go on this adventure that Gandalf is trying to like urge him to go on, and so we get a lot of sort of the trepidation of Bilbo to engage with Middle Earth on a large scale. As Bilbo, you see, lives in the Shire. The Shire is this place of relative safety. There's not really a whole lot going on there. I mean, the hobbits are happy with it. It's not like a boring place to live, but it certainly is not dangerous in any way or the most interesting place to live. Hobbits are these kind of rural folk that they spend their days baking pies and smoking, right? Like they're very simple folk. And so Gandalf, this wizard who, later in sort of the mythos of Middle Earth, we will come to know is this greater being who has been sent down to Middle Earth to steer it in the right direction. Gandalf comes to town and basically is like, Bilbo, dude, you got to go on this adventure. And, Gandalf invites these dwarves over to Bilbo's house, and we get all this fun, goofy stuff of the dwarves sort of helping themselves to Bilbo's food and helping themselves to his accommodation and all this stuff. Though then they like clean all the dishes, if I remember correctly. They like sing this song and are like cleaning up afterwards. So they're not like the worst guests in the world, but certainly at first Bilbo is surprised to see them. But the basic thrust of it is that Gandalf and the dwarves are here to recruit Bilbo to be their burglar. And their burglar is going to go into the Lonely Mountain, which is where the dwarves used to live, and steal treasure from this dragon that has made the Lonely Mountain its home. And the basic reason for this is that one of the dwarves, Thorin Oakenshield, is like a descendant of dwarven royalty. And he's kind of going to go back to the Lonely Mountain to reclaim what was, rightfully his family's. It rightfully belonged to his family. And he needs Bilbo to assist in this. And so, to make a long story short, Bilbo and these dwarves, and Gandalf in some parts, go on this journey where they encounter some incredible stuff. I was going to say dangerous stuff, but like not all of it is really dangerous. Some of it's really quite beautiful and outside of the norm for at least Bilbo. And so you have things like the first thing they encounter is some classic trolls, right? Some trolls out in the middle of the woods that they have to sort of figure out a way to grapple with in some way. And what's interesting is that, like, reading this book a second time around, the first time that I read this book, I think, like 9 or 10 maybe. I was pretty young. This is, in essence, kind of a children's story, if not in totality, at least the tone of it is very evokes a sense of kind of childlike wonder. It's kind of interesting to look at the like Bilbo is not technically a child, though he takes on kind of the role of this like childlike character throughout the book. But that's neither here nor there. It's interesting to come back to this book as an adult and kind of see what bits of it you latch onto more than others. And the things that I found that I latched onto more than anything else were these kind of moments where Bilbo becomes aware of how much he's capable of and how the perception of him by the dwarves changes over the course of the book. Where, and again, this is kind of, I'm assuming a little bit of this because I haven't read the Lord of the Rings, though I've seen the movies a million times. But a large theme of the Lord of the Rings movies revolves around people who you wouldn't expect to be able to do incredible things, doing incredible things, kind of in spite of their own nature, their stature, their circumstances, things that work against those characters, but they are able to fight their way through, persevere, and find beauty in the world and kind of fight for it. So at several points in The Hobbit, you have, you know, for instance, in the scene with the trolls, you have Bilbo being able to sort of, or I'll say actually in this scene in particular, it's more Gandalf being able to sort of trick these trolls into like arguing all night, and then once the sun comes up, you know, they turn to stone, and the puzzle has been solved more or less. It's funny too, coming to this with the eye of like having played so many role playing games, you know, Dungeons and Dragons and all these kind of like fantasy games and stuff like that. That like so much of that lineage is derived from things like The Hobbit. That like, you know, this classic sort of D&D encounter where, you know, you have like the rogue and all these, you know, all these dwarves and stuff kind of coming to this situation and bringing their various skill sets. What's funny too is that like in The Hobbit there are so many times where the dwarves get into some deep shit and Bilbo has to like pull them out of it. I mean, there's this whole section going into I believe it's Mirkwood that they go into, where the dwarves are captured by the elves and are just kind of held prisoner, and then Bilbo has to utilize his cunning in this ring that he finds along the way. Spoiler alert, there's this really powerful ring that Bilbo finds. But Bilbo has to kind of utilize this new treasure he's found and his own cunning to break these dwarves out. Another very interesting part too, that Bilbo like has to go and figure out that like, oh, they throw these wine casks into the river, and so that's how we'll sneak the dwarves out. Like once I get them out, I'll get them into these wine casks, and they'll you know, wind up in Lake Town. I don't know if he knows at that point where they're going, but he just knows that it will lead them out of the Mirkwood, or the Elven King's space, his town. I can't remember if the town has a name, but I did. By the way, I should mention, if I'm stumbling around a lot, I read this book in like August, I think. No, that can't be right. I read it in like no. I read it in like October. So it's been a few months. It's been like 2 months since I read this. So I'm gonna try to get better at like once I read the book, doing the episode like a day or two later, basically, so that at least I have a day or two to kind of digest the book itself, but I'm also doing it close enough to the book to where I don't forget huge parts of the plot, which like this is a pretty short book. It's hard to kind of forget much about it, but like there are certain bits and details that like if I had done the episode sooner, I might be able to grapple with. Um, so I just wanted to point that out so that if there's any part of this that feels a little rambly or disjointed, that's kind of why, or the main reason why, at least. Um, so where do I kind of want to dive in here? One thing that I think is really interesting about this book is that, and I don't know why as a kid I didn't notice this as much or I didn't tap into as much, but as an adult reading it, there is so much in this book about like not having enough supplies. They don't have food. They never have enough food. They're always cold. It's raining. They're having to figure out how to keep dry and to start a fire and stuff, and they barely ever have food. And they, there's so many. I mean, there are like at least a dozen times in this book where Bilbo is just kind of sitting there and thinking, "Man, I really wish I was at home." Like, I really wish, no matter if the dwarves have, admitted to me that they respect me now, or if they have sort of guaranteed that they're going to give me part of this treasure that we're burglarizing or whatever, regardless of any of that, I just want to be home. I don't care. No reward is going to be worth the trouble that they're, that I'm going through right now, the cold and the hunger and all this. And so when Bilbo and the dwarves end up they kind of end up in this little bay where Lake Town is. When they get out of the casks, they're like I remember that the dwarves are like dying of thirst, like, and like one of them, I think Balin maybe is like. By the way, all the dwarves have very silly names. For anybody who's never read The Hobbit, they're all like Oin and Gloin and Dwalin, Balin, and Stalin or whatever. And so one of the characters, I can't remember, maybe it's Bomber, is the dwarf that he like falls out of the wine cask and it's like comatose, basically, like literally they've been on this river for so long and he hasn't had food or water or anything, and they were also in jail before that, so they kind of were already sort of deprived of necessities. But there's so much desperation to this book. There's so much like just like desperately needing resources at every turn of the adventure. And though they find key items along the way, Bilbo finds the one ring to rule them all. They find these swords. What are their names? One is Goblin Cleaver, I believe. Glamdring. They have all these Orcrist, like all these very cool names for these swords that I didn't know this actually. This was news to me, but I guess swords of elven make, if they're around something evil enough. I'm not sure if it's just goblins and orcs or if it's just evil in general, but like basically they glow like like lightsabers. Obviously Sting, Bilbo's sword that he finds, is capable of that. We know that from the movies, but I didn't realize that pretty much all, or it kind of depends, but like a lot of elven blades, especially older ones, are capable of this sort of glowing when in proximity to great evil property. Again, I'm probably going to get a lot of Tolkien lore wrong here, and big Tolkien nerds are going to watch this and be like, this dude doesn't know what he's talking about. I don't. You're correct. But being a Tolkien fan and kind of like getting some of these factoids here and there, is really interesting because it's, even though again some of the context is missing because I haven't read the Silmarillion and whatnot, it's fun to just kind of piece those puzzle pieces together at various points. And so this book is kind of hard to talk about in terms of the themes and symbolism and things of that nature because, as I understand it, J.R.R. Tolkien was not a big fan of symbolism or allegory or, having things in tales that aren't like exactly what they are, if that makes sense. Like, as far as I'm aware, he wasn't a big fan of being like any meaning that you pull from a story is independent of the meaning of the story itself or the plot of the story itself, if that makes sense. For instance, there is a lot of people who theorize that the eagles that at various points in The Hobbit save the butts of the adventuring party. Some people have a lot of people have theorized that those eagles are sort of symbols for America in the First World War, in that at least kind of I would need to brush up on my World War One history, which I at some point probably will do, but the perception at the time and even to today, I think some of the perception is that the United States came in 1917, 1918 in World War One to kind of like save the behinds of France and these nations that had been fighting Germany and like all these places. Again, I don't know if any of that's true. I'm stating like what I know from just like cultural osmosis, basically. I don't know a lot about World War One. But what I'm trying to get at here is that a lot of people have said that the eagles in The Hobbit are sort of indicative of America because, the United States is bald eagle symbolism and freedom and all this stuff that kind of Tolkien's experiences in World War One informed his writing of The Hobbit and of The Lord of the Rings and all this stuff. And I'm sure that some of that is meaningful in some way. Like, I don't think that you can take someone like Tolkien, who is a storyteller, and separate them from the context in which they lived. There's always going to be the life experiences of an author flavoring and coloring the things that they write about and the things that they create. However, when discussing a work of art where the person who created it has said over and over again, this is not allegory. This is not... This story is simply an adventure story. It's not meant to kind of like evoke any larger ideas about the world, right? It's mostly just a story about these imaginary creatures. Fantasy is meant to be kind of a method of escapism where the person reading it is escaping the woes of everyday life, like someone might have been doing in World War One had they been reading a Tolkien book. Fantasy is a way of escaping the woes of everyday life and being transported somewhere else. So I don't want to sit here and say that like I'm the special person who's going to pull some kind of deeper meaning from The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings or anything like that. I'm not that guy. I'll just say that broad strokes, broadly, the message and impressions that I got from The Hobbit were of, number one, like I was stating earlier, people being capable of much more than they think that they are, or some people are at least, and that through perseverance and endurance and bravery and courage and the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Like the desirable qualities that most people look for in themselves and others, displaying those qualities. I'm trying to thread the needle here on this thought. Basically, that like displaying those desirable qualities, bravery and courage, and all these things. Through doing this, you are able to do much more than you have maybe previously thought that you were capable of. At the beginning of the story, Bilbo does not want to go on the adventure. He doesn't want to put himself in danger. He is happy where he is. He is called into action, and there are many points in the story where Bilbo thinks that he is going to be broken, spiritually or physically or just his own mental capacity or any of that, you know. The adventure pushes him to his limits. And there's a lot of the meat and potatoes of that in The Lord of the Rings as well, with Frodo and Sam and all of the characters, really. But a big message I took from this book is simply just like through, again, bravery and courage and inner strength and endurance, you can do really great things. Some other messages or themes that I think are worth noting or worth taking from The Hobbit. The beauty of nature. There is so much of this book that is wrapped up in talking about various landscapes and there's this mountain over here that then the river cuts through this pass and leads down to a grove where, you know, there are these mushroom laden trees and like all this stuff. There's so much of that in this book where Tolkien is just taking us on this journey visually with Bilbo, describing the things that they're seeing. There's moments where he's describing what it's like to come to, I believe it's called the last homely house is Elrond's home, but there's also like elves kind of scattered around the valley where he lives. But when he's talking about coming down into this valley and seeing Elrond's house and all the elves are like singing and all this stuff. By the way, there's a lot of songs in this book. A lot of people singing in Tolkien's world, which is, I think, is cool. A lot of people are iffy on the poetry and singing in these books. I personally think it's awesome, for reasons maybe I'll get into in a little bit. But they come down into this valley and all these elves are kind of singing and greeting them, and just the beauty and majesty of the world that they're exploring at times is kind of staggering. And weirdly, because I don't think there's anything explicitly said in this book about sort of needing to preserve the beauty of Middle-earth or needing to fight to make Middle-earth or to keep Middle-earth the way it is or anything like that. But certainly the impression reading it with a modern outlook, the outlook of a person reading it in 2024, going into 2025, once again, Happy New Year. You know, the impression that you get is one of someone who has a deep gratitude and appreciation for nature. And so it's hard not to kind of take a environmentalist, conservationist impression from this book, if that makes sense. So that's definitely something that I took from this book. There was a lot towards the end, once the hobbits and the Hobbit and the dwarves get to Lake Town and make their way to Smaug's cavern. A lot of people say Smaug. I don't really understand that. Ever since I was a kid reading this book, it just, to me, it read as Smaug. I don't know why people say Smaug. Why that became the the thing that seeped into the narrative. I don't know. But again, this really awesome song that they sing in Lake Town, the people that live in Lake Town, singing about this dwarven king who's going to come back one day and make them all rich or something. I can't remember the exact content, but just like the idea of all these people being so stoked that Thorin Oakenshield is back and they're going to sing this song. I kind of like the songs in Tolkien's writing. I think the main reason is because when talking about realism and talking about having real fantasy or having a real escapist fantasy, one of the things that makes the world come alive is the fact that there are songs that people just know. There are songs that people just sing. If you're walking around at the grocery store, right, and they're playing music over the speakers, there's several people in the store that just kind of know this song that's on. Now, I mean, in our world, that's because of marketing and pop culture and like all these different things. But in creating a realistic fantasy realm, it helps to have little mundane things like that people share, because that's how societies are in real life. Like, they have these cultural touchstones that bind people together. And so the fact that all these elves know this song and all the goblins know this song and all the people of Lake Town know this song, it just, to me, it makes the world feel more realistic. Now, even though the songs are sometimes a bit silly, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that could criticize Tolkien's writing style and his poetry. It's not like the most, impressive poetry that you've ever heard or read. I think there's something to be said about creating a realistic fantasy world and impressing upon the reader how deep this fantasy goes through the songs. And also, Far Over the Misty Mountains, I can't remember the name of the actual, like the title of the song, but the Misty Mountains song that the dwarves sing, Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, blah, blah, blah. That song is just awesome. And in the moment in the song where the dwarves are kind of trying to convince Bilbo to come with them to go on this journey, they sing him this song about, like, the dragon's fire in the trees and the dragon's the wind in the stars and like all this stuff. And it's just like, it's describing the dragon's initial attack and the way that the dwarves were kind of pushed out of that area so beautifully. And so yeah, if I get 100 crappy poems or songs just so that I can get Far Over the Misty Mountains, I don't know. I'm okay with that. that's a trade-off I'm willing to do. But getting back to what I was originally saying about Lake Town and sort of the later part of the book, I think it's interesting that a lot of the latter part of this book seems to be concerned with, like, friendship and trusting people. Basically, like, once Smaug is killed, which I love the fact in this book that, like, we're following Bilbo, and Bilbo is ostensibly the main character of this book. Actually, not even ostensibly, he just is the main character of the book. That the person who kills Smaug is just some dude. That now he has a cool backstory. Of course, every character in every Tolkien story has a cool backstory, but like I think like his dad was originally the leader of Lake Town, or he was the leader of Dale. Like, was he might have been somebody in Dale or something like that. But this random dude that we meet like like 5 pages before he does it is the one who actually takes Smaug down with an arrow through this sort of weak part in Smaug's armor. But anyhow, Smaug eventually dies, and there's this whole hoard of treasure that's left unguarded, and so this becomes the origins of the Battle of the Five Armies and all this stuff. And so it kind of becomes like a story about how the greed of people and the way that like human relationships are affected by greed, I think, is a big theme in this later part of the story, because it's like, you know, the dragon's gone, and finally, you know, Thorin is able to reclaim what his family had and all this stuff, but people are feel as if things are owed to them, and all this obligation comes into the picture, and you know, there's all that kind of tied into the end of the book. And then, you know, we have Bilbo just going home, and he, you know, and he's so grateful to be home. But certainly, I think that this book, more than anything, is a adventure, and it's an adventure that I think is simple enough to entice young readers, but the world building and story and just like the mystery behind it, or the sort of mythos behind it, I guess you could say, is certainly worth checking out, you know, well into your 20s, like I am. Very awesome book. I had an absolute blast reading this book. I was thinking about, like, I should try to do a sort of rereading of it every few years. I was even thinking while I was reading it, this would be a great book to read as like a bedtime story for kids, because you could read like one chapter per night, and you know, it's none of it gets too like gory or actiony to where it's like scary. Some of it's a little scary, but I think the best kids story, bedtime story, you know, kind of have a little bit of that in the bones of it. So, that's The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Again, I loved it. It was a real treat getting to revisit it after all this time, and I'm really glad that I did. So, yeah. Let's see here. Okay, so I think now I'll talk a little bit about what's coming up. So after I finished The Hobbit in October, I around the same time I had joined a book club. And so the books that I'm going to be reading for book club, I will also be talking about on this channel and on What You Reading For. So the book right after The Hobbit was our first book club book. So that's why I finished it back in October. Shortly after that, I started reading Dan Simmons' Hyperion. This is a sci-fi novel written, I think, back in the 80s, I believe. This is what we're going to be talking about next on What You Reading For, episode 5. We will be talking about Hyperion by Dan Simmons. I don't know when I'm going to record this. Probably within the next week or two, but I'm not 100% sure. I finished this maybe like a month ago, because I finished it, I believe, at the beginning of December. So just about a month ago, I finished this. And so I will be doing my next episode on this. worth reading, worth checking out for sure. I'll save my thoughts for it for next time, my thoughts on it for next time, but certainly worth checking out. So after that, I'm just going to talk about the next book or two that I'm planning on reading, so that people have time to get the books, read them, and then come watch the What You Reading For breakdown and hardcore analysis that you guys know that I love to do here. So we then decided that the next book that we're going to be reading, which we'll be discussing it for book club at the end of January, is Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. I am very excited to read this. This has been on my personal reading list for a long time, so I'm very excited to check it out. I just got this copy yesterday because Barnes & Noble was having a hardcover sale, so hardcover books were like a third off, 30% off or whatever. So I was like, well, I know I need a copy of Blood Meridian, so I'll go check it out. And so going to be reading this. However, the episode after Hyperion is going to be Dune by Frank Herbert. The reason for that is because Blood Meridian is such a short book, and Blood Meridian is really only going to take me like 2 weeks to read. I've been kind of like blowing through books faster than I have in the past. So Dune's a little bit longer. It's like 500 pages, maybe a little bit less. But I decided I'm going to try to finish this sort of before I dive into Blood Meridian for the end of January. The reason for that is basically that my goal for 2024 was, if you guys remember me talking about this at the beginning of the podcast, is that my goal for 2024 was to read one book per month. I don't think that I met it. In fact, I'm almost 100% sure that I didn't. But I got pretty close. And now I'm kind of picking up speed a little bit with books to where I'm reading a little bit faster. And so for 2025, my goal is one book every 2 weeks. I don't think that's unrealistic, whatsoever. I don't think that's a terribly unrealistic goal for me to set for myself. So halfway through January, going to be finishing Dune. So what I think the schedule is probably going to look like for right now is sometime in the next week or two, we're going to do Hyperion. Sometime maybe a week or two after that, we'll be doing Dune. And then very shortly after that, we'll be doing Blood Meridian. I don't know what I'm going to read after that. I have a lot of books that I am meaning to read. Just looking at some on my little stack right here that I'm using to hold up my phone. I have Brandon Sanderson's The Way of Kings, which I know people love. I don't know anything about it, so I'm excited to dive into that. I also have some nonfiction that I've been meaning to read. So I've got The Great Shark Hunt by Hunter S. Thompson. I've also have some manga that I've been meaning to read. I don't know if you guys would be interested in hearing me talk about manga at all. I have the first issue of Fire Punch that I've been meaning to read. But I got a couple other books that for Christmas that I'm really excited about, so those will be coming up. I don't know quite in what order I'm going to be reading them, but I will let you guys know as soon as I do know that. Just for a comics update, because I know in the last episode or two, I think I mentioned I'll be talking just a little bit about comics that I'm reading at the moment. So, I just yesterday got issue 5 of the latest Carnage series that's been going on. So I have like the next couple issues of the 2023 and 4 series of Carnage that I plan on reading. That's coming up. They did a 1-issue Doom series, Doctor Doom. I don't really know what the plot of it is, if it's any kind of like reboot or something, but I saw it in the store and I hadn't seen it for a while, and I was like, you know what? Let's check out Doctor Doom. Very shortly after that, the new Scarlet Witch series. I have the first, I think, 4 issues for the new Scarlet Witch series they're doing. I'm gonna be reading that. I just saw, I think they're on like issue 7 or 8 when I was at the comic shop yesterday. So I do have a little bit of catching up to do. But yeah, so at the moment I'm working my way through Carnage, but I have a couple other series lined up to check out. I'm very excited to check out NYX, which is supposed to be very good. I'm also continuing with Immortal Thor. Immortal Thor has been a real blast, and I'm excited to see where the story is going. I'm like 5 or 6 issues behind on Immortal Thor. And then I also, just a little humble brag, I got a copy of issue 6 of Twilight Avengers, which was a Avengers miniseries they did a while back that I just could not find the final issue of. So I was like, I guess I'll just never know how that story ends, because I just wasn't able to find the issue, but I finally found it yesterday and got it, so I get to finish Twilight Avengers, or sorry, Avengers Twilight. But yeah, so that's what I'm reading right now. I'm very excited to dive into more books with you guys in 2025. I hope everybody's been enjoying what they've been reading. If you feel like it, comment down below. Let me know what you've been reading. Make sure to like this stream so that other people can see it. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you get notified every time I do one of these What You Read in 4 episodes. But other than that, guys, much love. Once again, Merry Christmas if you celebrate. Any other winter holidays that you celebrate, happy that. And, of course, Happy New Year to everybody. And, yeah. So, folks, I will see you next time. If I can figure out how to end the stream. Oh, there we go. Okay. Goodbye, everybody.